Wrong week to quit sniffing glue.
What we do here at this department is we try to engage with the prawn on behalf of MNU and on behalf of humans.
Well, welcome back. It is Monday. We start another week on Christopher Johnson. And like I said, didn't get a lot done this week on account of had to do some other errands today. And one of the other errands was I had a doctor visit for my skin. It's the largest organ you have, folks, so be careful with it. But many of you know, 2014, I had a melanoma removed from my cheek. I always be careful to tell people when they say, where was it? I say, a cheek on my face. It was a facial cheek. So I had that removed, and then since then I've been on a regimen of every 6 months going back and getting a checkup, making sure nothing is cropping up anywhere. Well, I'm happy to report that at my visit today, they have pushed me back to only having to come in once a year now. So that's automatically having my numbers of times that I have to go and be uncomfortably examined by generally pretty young girls. And it's an uncomfortable thing because, you know, you're laying out there on this table and you're just looking for imperfections. And oh boy, were there plenty to see. So that's over with for the time being. I'm back, and if anything, I notice anything, I'm supposed to go back in and visit. But that's your public service announcement. If you've got a mole or a freckle that is growing or changing color, get thee to a dermatologist. They will take good care of you. So that kind of interrupted my flow for today. It's one of those weird things. It's, you know, it's in the middle of the day, and it's, you know, you don't want to start anything on the beginning of it, and by the time you get back, it's kind of too late to do anything. So what I did do was go out and get some weed brushes and some paints and supplies at the Michael's that was pretty close to it. So I'm ready to hit the ground tomorrow on Christopher Johnson here. I realized over the weekend, I've got to drill new pins in his feet so that I can stick him down to the base and have that be a good and solid thing, because that's not something you want to have fall over backwards. Take a header off of the stand. And that's going to be pretty much it for today, and we'll hit this again tomorrow. Well, good afternoon, friends. It is Tuesday, and even though the calendar on the wall says it is the first day of spring, you would have a hard time convincing me of that if you step outside. It is cold, it is wet, it is raw. It is the kind of day that makes you wish you were curled up on the couch with a warm blanket and a fine film. So that's not what we're going to do today, though. No, sir. We are going to launch back into painting on Christopher Johnson, trying to get him finished up this week. And this is the point in the painting where the changes are tiny and incremental, and you don't always see them. They're not readily apparent like it is at the beginning when you are, you know, putting primer down and stuff like that. This is a time when, you know, I may change an eye flick here and then come back to it, and you may not notice all that bit much of a difference until it's pointed out. The arms are in the other room. I have put a coat of clear flat on them because once I get the eyes done, I want to glue the arms in, or epoxy the arms in. And I've also got to, and I probably need to do this first, is I need to re-drill holes for the pins, because the original pins have long since broken off, and you can see there where the pin used to be, and that one's a little nubbin of a pin that, you know, works a bit but not all that much. So and of course I'm going to want to pack in around the feet with epoxy sculpt. So the first thing to do would be to set these pins, drill the pins, and then get them ready to glue in. Let's do that now. Lay him down and map out where I want the pins to be. The nice thing about this being broken off is if I aim for the center of that, and then I aim for the center of where it goes, then I'm still roughly in the right ballpark when it comes to pin locations. So, what do you think? Do you think I got the eyes right? I'm sure they'll look a lot better once I put the gloss over them. But right now, I think that's darn close. I may put a wash of the brown over top of everything before it's cleared, before it's gloss coated. I think the definitions between the pupil and the iris and the whites as they are a little bit too well defined. When I look at the references, they're not that well defined. It's more of a brown haze. So I might put a brown, and there it goes. There it goes, ladies and gentlemen. I just broke off an antler, a feeler. I've gone this long without it, and I just did it, and you caught it on camera. But just before I put the gloss over there, I'm going to put a wash to kind of dull those differences down. And now I'm going to go find this and put it on. Okay, a quick search and I found the part, and I've got it glued back on. But I swear at this point it's probably more glue than resin, because it's broken so many times that I've re-glued it. I think it's probably all made of resin at this point. Let the eyes dry, put a clear coat on them, and then see how I like. Actually, put a clear coat on them, yes. Clear coat them, and then put a wash over it so that if I don't like the wash, I can wipe it back off. But yeah, that's the place where it's going to dry for a while. He looks a bit wall-eyed in this view, but he is actually... See, if you go like that, he looks a bit like he's Marty Feldman. But if you do this, then his eyes seem to be focusing in the same place. So it's all a matter of perspective. Okay, it's time to add some clear over these eyes now that they've had a chance to dry. And one thing the clear does is it really brings out the color. I've used clear highlighting on a ton of stuff. You use it on eyes and lips and teeth to bring out the natural wetness of an overall, or what would be a naturally dry or flat skin tone. But you put a little pop of clear on those and it really makes all the difference. So I'm going to put some clear over top of the eyes, and then I'm going to hit the tape again once more while I have got it out. But I think it's really going to make those colors pop, and then we'll see what needs to be done to finish them up, and whether or not I'm going to need... Usually when you're painting eyes, sorry I'm babbling, usually when you're painting eyes you put a white dot highlight on them, and sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't really need to if you put the clear on it and the clear is shiny enough. So that'll be the other determining thing. If I put this clear on it, it'll tell me if I need to put a white dot highlight on it. And here are the results. The eyes have got gloss on them now. The snout and mandibles have gloss on them now. The little Zoidbergisms have gloss on them. It really brought the color of the eyes out. I don't think I need to put any false white highlights in the eyes, because once you put them under the light, that really becomes evident. I think I may put another coat of the clear on there just to really bring up the gloss on that. But yeah, I don't think I need to put a wash over it now that I've walked away and come back. I am... You know, sometimes you get caught up while you're doing something, and then it takes just a chance to walk away and come back to see if what you remember is actually what was there. But yeah, I think I am quite happy with how those eyes turned out. Yeah, I'll sleep on it tonight and then see how I feel about it in the morning. But yeah, I think it's about as good as I'm going to get. It's one of those things where, could I do better? Maybe. Could I also do something really horrible? Yeah. So what do you risk? Yeah, you do a risk assessment, for lack of a better term. But I think the eyes have it. Well, I'm out here on the other room, and I'm working on the other big project. And this is the size of the jar I used on the product, the Tamiya clear that I used on Christopher Johnson on his eyes and snout. But when you've got a bigger project, sometimes you need to go with bigger tools. And this is the Liquitex high gloss varnish that I am using. Well, here's the other thing. That's the brush I used. That brush goes with that. This brush goes with this. So when you can think of that, there's the difference between the two sizes of bristles. That brings you to this project. This is, of course, Slimer. He's laying on his back, but again, this is what happens when you use the gloss on, and I've just liberally brushed it on the teeth and gums and the eyeballs, and looks so much better. This clear gloss makes all the difference in the world. All of a sudden, this looks a lot more real, a lot more appropriate. And now I can go in and put the brown gingivitis in and the cavities and the things like that. They just weren't going in on the flat paint properly. They would soak in. They wouldn't wipe off correctly. And I think they realized the problem was these needed to be glossed before I did that. So it's quite a different animal when you're working with something this big, because the size of the paint tubes. Here is the, for example, this is the size of the paint tube for this tooth color. Again, here is the tongue. But you're talking about, here's the paint jug for painting Slimer. It's a big ass, family show. It's a big jug of paint. The smallest tube of paint I used was this craft paint. You're just working on a completely different scale when you're working with something like this, and it takes a bit of an adjustment when these are your two different brush sizes. This is the size of the brush I use just for the clear glazing. But now I can get back to painting these eyes and teeth. Okay, here's a delightful turn of events. It's Wednesday. It is the 21st of March. It is snowing outside. Now, growing up, this would have been no big deal, because I grew up in a town far northern from here, but this is Raleigh, North Carolina on the 21st of March, and it is snowing. Now all of this will be gone. It will never it will never accumulate on the ground. I'm sure there are people who are running to the Walmart to get their milk and bread for the impending apocalypse. But this is a simple late spring, actually first day of spring, first full day of spring, snow shower. Ain't nature grand? Well, I'm back indoors now after enjoying that nice little bit of nature, and getting ready to do some major construction today. I am gonna get him onto there, and I noticed something rather interesting. Well, you may make your own decision about how interesting it is. I was positioning him on the base, and I was looking at it and thinking about how he was gonna get him on camera, how he was going to work, and I noticed that the base and Christopher Johnson had the same intensity, and I didn't like that. Bases to me are like backgrounds. They should recede. They should hold up your kit. They should show off your kit, but they should not overshadow your kit. They should not steal focus away from your kit. So what I did was I took just took some Tamiya buff, and I just did a light spritz of the Tamiya buff over everything to kind of dull it all down, blend it all back, and knock it down so that it was not so real and contrasty and for lack of a better term, attention stealing. So it's still there. It still gives the impression of the trash laden district, but it does not have all of the dark colors and the attention-grabbing things that it had before. I think that Christopher, he stands out a lot better against it now than he did when everything had the same intensity. You'll notice that I did not change his eyes. I woke up this morning, looked him in the eye, and said, yes, I'm happy with those eyes, so I'm going to leave them. All I need to do now is start drilling for pins and pinning things together. I did not do that yesterday. Like I said I was going to. I did not pin his feet. So I need to do that this morning. And then I can get his arms, arm 1 and arm 2, in place and get him on the base today. And that is certainly the goal. And then everything else that I need to touch up, I feel I can do from a position of it being all nice and put together, because you'll get situations like, okay, once the arm is in place here, if there's anything back in there I don't like, well, I'm never going to see it again, so it doesn't really matter. So I get to the point where I'm only patching and fixing things that are visible. The downside of that is anything that I want to paint, I need to make sure that I have got taken care of before I put that arm on there, because I'll never be able to get a brush up underneath it. So time for last looks. And you know what? I might put the felt on the bottom of this before I do anything else, because I think it's going to be easier than trying to jockey him around once and put the felt on once he's attached. He's just going to be so fragile. So I'll drill out for the pins and then probably give this a good semi-gloss spray just to lock everything in, and then put the felt on the bottom. And then anything else I want to do, like I said, I could touch up once he's on the base. There will be epoxy sculpt under his feet to level them up, to make sure he's got a good seat on the base. So that'll obviously have to be painted in and blended and all of that kind of stuff. But obviously can't do that till he is in place. So let me see if it stops snowing outside, and I will hit this with a semi-gloss finish. Okay, I've got him more or less dry fit on the base. Now what I've got to do is pull him back off, throw some epoxy down the holes, and reattach him. I've got pins, some brass rod going up into his feet. Once that's nice and secure, I will do probably a variation of the same thing with his arms, just for the extra added support of having some pins in there. I don't know how necessary it's going to be, but at this point it's belt and suspenders time. Okay, this is being a bit stubborn, so I'm going to walk away from it for a while. I have set the feet in epoxy. There is a pin going up through the ankle. This foot, I don't know what, I'm sure it has to do with how it's sculpted, but it's sculpted to look like he's lifting that foot up off the ground. There is a support underneath it at the very ball of the foot, but I don't like it. So I think once this epoxy has dried, I'm going to pack in some epoxy sculpt around that to make it look like it is also more firmly seated on the ground rather than being lifted off. I just don't think that's a very good sculpt. If he is in mid-stride, that's one thing, but he looks like he's fairly well posed with gun in hand, so I don't like it, so I'm going to change it. This is my right, but let this dry for a while, get all good and solid in there, and then I'll do some remedying here. Maybe not around the whole foot, but at least under his side there. And I've put the felt on the bottom. I just need to trim it. It's got the adhesive back on it, so I just need to let that. I sat that down all at one time because I wanted to make sure it was down before I started putting the arms in and stuff. So that's got to be trimmed off. But we're at a walk away from it stage, so I will do the right thing and walk away from it. And I am back from lunch. Evidence of where I enjoyed my lunch at Bojangles again. I'm not looking for a sponsor, but hey, if you want to send me Bojangles, give me a call. Anyway, back And this has got a good solid grip on the base. I can pick it up by his meaty wing there, or his drumstick, and I've still got chicken on the mind, sorry. And he's nice and glued down. So next thing to do is to put in this arm, because it's gonna go where it wants to go, and this one is the one that has to fit up to meet it. So let this one dictate the placement of the other one. So let's get the glue in. I'm probably going to have to, well, I know I'm going to have to put the camera down, but I'm probably going to have to hold it in place for a few seconds while the glue dries. I can't just, there's no real way to set it up and then use a, well, you know what I'm saying. I can't just let it go. So let's get this bad boy in position. You see the pin I put on it, and it's going to want to go something, and I'm being very careful about the little canisters that are on the gun that probably will want to jump off into the rest of the work table. So there we go. That's kind of the position. So let me pull it back out and throw some glue on it. Lots of CA. Lots of CA on this one. Take the glasses off so I can see what I'm doing, ironically enough. Come on. There we go. It's in the hole. Okay. A quick spritz with the, I know this may seem excessive, but I want to get a little spritz of the kicker in there. And I'll let the kicker dry, because sometimes when I wipe it off, it wants to take paint with it. I don't think that'll be the case here, but better safe than sorry. Although I spend a lot of time being sorry, so I'm quite used to it. Do a little bit of mopping off here. Yeah, I see, that's the nice thing about having had sprayed this thing with flat coats and gloss coats and all of that, is that it does lock the paint underneath it, and if anything wants to take that paint off, it's got to work through a couple different layers of things. So there we go, clean that off. Okay, that arm is in and good, and now I can, see? And now I can do the positioning on this one. Kind of has to do two things at once. It has to go in at the shoulder and up underneath for the gun. So something like that. I don't know exactly what the holdup is on that. Clean that off a little bit more, make that want to go up underneath it. Okay, since I've put this on before and know basically where it needs to go, I can go ahead and put the CA on it and get it ready to go. I'm not going to put any CA under the hand where it meets the gun. I might try to put some epoxy on that later, but it's kind of a thing where, see, you gotta, there you go, see, it's under the hand, it's under the gun, as are we all these days, under the gun, but its shoulder is up in the shoulder and the hand is under the gun, and we've got a final pose. Now it looks like there will be opportunity to take a small putty knife and some epoxy sculpt and maybe flesh out that shoulder joint a little bit, so that yeah, there's a bit of a gaposis going on up there, but it fits under the gun just nicely. So that support is taken up. Yeah, I'll go squeeze that in there a little bit and let that. Here. Yeah, get some of this kicker up in there. Mop that off. Okay, we're going to let all that sit and dry, and then come back to it and reinforce some stuff with some epoxy sculpt. But there she is. There's your Christopher Johnson in the final pose. Antenna intact, and canisters intact, and those are the things that are the most likely to jump off and run screaming underneath the workbench. But let this dry and then come back to it in a bit. Okay, I couldn't resist the opportunity to dig out this turntable. It just happens to be the perfect size. And put Christopher Johnson, let him go for a spin. The one last thing I need to do, really, well, no, a couple last things. Maybe four last things at the most. I need to pad some putty under his right foot. I also need to touch up colors on the base. Let's see what else. Give him a good going over from top to bottom, just to make sure all the details have been neatened up and cleaned up. But generally he is done and happy to be so. So yeah, no reason. Oh, last thing that reminded me. I want to do some mud splatter on his feet, and there's a little bit of mud splatter on the back of his vest that I noticed from the screen caps. So that would be the last bit of weathering and tying him into the base would be the mud splatter. There's a little bit of gloss between his toes where the epoxy has seeped out and given the gloss a look, and I think I want to take care of that. There's a little bit of detailing on the base where the dirt spills out over top of the nice framework of the blue base. I want to neaten that up a bit, but I'm going to get the putty out and putty it around his foot, and then let that dry overnight and come back to it tomorrow and hopefully finish the paint on this tomorrow. Okay, here is the last bit of work I'm going to do on Christopher Johnson for the day. I have just sculpted in some details to go around his feet, or his foot, to hide the fact that it was basically hanging up in midair. Sorry, I had to sneeze. But I was thinking I didn't want to try to compete with all this other really neat textured stuff to make it look more like, more slop on the ground. So I decided to make it hard and angular, and I will either paint it to look like a crushed box, or maybe some bricks or something. It's not going to be... My first thought was maybe, a natural stone or something, but that really wasn't keeping with the surroundings. But I could make it another piece of trash that he's just stepped up on, and it gives me an excuse to throw some nice hard angles into this otherwise very organic base. So that'll dry overnight, and I'll come back and paint it tomorrow, and then we will stick a fork in this little prawn because he's ready for the Barbie. Well, howdy do and good morning. It is Thursday, and we may finish up this little joker today. Overnight, the epoxy sculpt has hardened. I would say mostly hardened. For some reason, this front end still giving me a little bit of trouble. I may want to cut that. Yeah, see, that must not have been mixed up very well. So I'm going to cut that part off. But the harder parts that are working, I'm going to paint up, probably to look like a cinder block. And then we'll give this a toes to antenna going over to make sure every last detail has been addressed, and then we will stick a fork in it because it will in fact be done. Okay, I believe I figured out what the issue was. For the first time in my life, I used this stuff. which is supposed to be solvent for smoothing, texturing, and cleaning Abe's epoxy sculpt. And what happened is I used too much of it, and it sat on the top there, and it never, since it's made for making it smooth and workable, it never completely dried. So what I'm doing is just scraping off the affected areas to get down to the dry stuff, and then I'll take it from there. But that's what the stuff was. I've never used that before, even though this is ostensibly a brand new batch of epoxy sculpt, because I just opened up the new tub, and it's whiter than the epoxy sculpt I've used before. I mixed it up just the same as I normally would, and 85 to 90% of it is dry. It's just this one little leading edge out here that isn't. So away it goes, and I will once I get down to bone, I will paint it from there. Okay, we're out here in the dining room working on the other job while the newly formed epoxy sculpt is setting up on Christopher Johnson, and we're getting back to doing the eyes and teeth on Slimer. Now, his teeth are in great shape, all evidence to the contrary. Very happy with those. I'm going to be putting in the dark brown cavities and other stains later, but now I'm working on the eyes. His eyes are red. It's an interesting thing I've found a way to do, and that is to cut red circles out of vinyl. That lets me do two things. A, I can play around with the size and positioning. Boy, this is tough to do because this is a huge figure to try to work with. But by cutting out circles in red vinyl, I can not only get the right color and see how the color is going to work with the rest of the face, but I can, by moving it around, I can get the size that I want. Is the pupil too big? Is the pupil too small? So I cut a bunch of circles in a bunch of different sizes, and I mix and match till I find the ones I think are the right size. And then I can position them in place over the eyeball. And since it's got this gloss finish on it, there's no worry about pulling up paint or anything. But I can see to make sure that I've got the eyes looking in the right direction, both looking together, getting the right expression, and then I can pop it into place. And then what happens is I can take, although, oh, I'm sorry, you can't see that, there's a box around those circles, so I can take that as a mask and place it around the red blank that's there. It also allows me an opportunity to be able to go in and, just by using a Sharpie, figure out how big the pupil needs to be. And I'm thinking something about that size. On both of them, and then I can go back and kind of measure that circle and make a mask to cut those out. But it helps me in making sure the eyes are pointing both in the same direction, the same general direction, and then I can use these as a guide to paint in the actual eyes. Here's that mask I was talking about. I can now pull this off of the paper, put it around the circle where the iris is, and pull the iris back out so that when I pull out the red paint, I can paint basically in the same location where I've taken off the vinyl. And I am going to paint those on. It's not, the vinyl is nice, but it can't give me the subtleties that I'm looking for. Okay, I'm using this wonderful book, The Ultimate Visual History of Ghostbusters, as a reference. And on page 77, there's a full page of what the actual full-size Slimer prop looked like. And that's probably the best reference you're ever going to find on it. Now, it doesn't really give you a good look at his face full on, but it does show me the level, oh, I'm getting the glare off of the light, sorry, off of the level of gingivitis that he's got, the level of staining on the teeth and the gums, and also about how big his iris should be which is larger than what I've got. So I think I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board and make some bigger circles. I don't think I think I might have been going for the cartoon look that was a little bit smaller in pupil than that. So let's go make some bigger circles and try that again. Okay, hopefully you can tell the difference between the new eye on the left and the original eye on the right. It's more along, I think the one on the left is more along the proportions of a human eye, whereas the one on the right is more of a creature eye or a monster eye. But I think I like the larger one better. It does give more heft to the eye. Yeah, let me draw in the pupil and see how that's going to look. Okay, with the black pupil drawn in, and I just drew in some of those little lines you see in the coloration of your eye, just to give an indication. I do enjoy that. I do like that a lot better. So, of course, the neat trick is going to be either dragging this to the other room or dragging the airbrush out here so that I can spray the eyes to begin with. I may try to just mask them off and paint them by hand with a brush to see how well that works. So I don't have to bring out a whole bunch of equipment. But yeah. Okay, now I just need to replace the one over here and then put the surrounding mask. Again, it's this deal. Put the surrounding mask in place over the eye. And another thing about painting as opposed to putting vinyl down, even here you can see the vinyl won't lay flat over this compound curve without cutting some darts in it, which I don't want to do. But paint, you don't have to worry about that. Yeah, it looks a bit like a sixth stair, but I've got the masks in place to give me the round shapes to paint the colored bits of the eyes in. So let me do that, and I'm going to do that by hand rather than trying to airbrush that. That's just folly. And I've got the first coat of the iris color in now. Because this is being painted over this high gloss Liquitex finish, the paint doesn't want to stick very well to it. So it's going to look like it's going to take at least more than one coat to do it. So we'll let these dry and then come back to it. Hopefully this red coat will give me a better tooth for the next coat, and I can start putting in the cones. I guess those are what those are called. So I need to get maybe some yellows and some oranges in there so that I can put the color variations in the cones and rods in the iris. I hope at least half of those technical terms were correct. Okay, I've got eyeballs drying in the other room, so it's time to get back to Christopher Johnson's base. This front bit that I've reconstructed is still a bit touchy, so won't be working on that. Try to paint around it, but I think I can lay in some primerish color, some base color over the part that I worked on yesterday. Plus there's other little bits in here that need touched up and better defined, things like that. So let's get on with that. Now I haven't really touched on this since yesterday when I glued everything in, but it's had overnight to set up. All the hands are very stable. The gun is very stable. Nothing wonky there. The gloss on the eye and the gooey bits around his mouth is looking very good. So I do need to touch up the troublesome antennae a little bit. Just put some lighter color on them. I know they're darker than most of the rest of him, but they still need a little bit of color put on them. And we are very close. We're very close to being finished. So it's these little touch-ups that always get me in the end because you don't exactly know when to stop. Now I do want to spatter some dirt on the back of his jacket there, some mud, splash mud. So I'm going to have to like block off an area here so that I don't inadvertently splash mud on the rest of his skin where it's not supposed to be. So I may have to try that out on another scrap piece to get the right technique down. Okay, I just did some mud splattering. I got to clean it back off of this blue base, but I think I got the jacket just right. I didn't want to put too much on there, but get some mud spatter. I think it looks good. And now we need to just do the cleanup on that. Okay, I'm getting my exercise today because I'm running back and forth from room to room trying to carry on 2 projects at once. I'm starting to put the gingivitis in and the aging on the teeth, and I'm doing it very lightly with the rust texture from the Vallejo weathering stuff, and it's just a question of, you know, putting it on at the root there, drawing it up between the teeth. And then the nice thing about this gloss finish that's working in my favor for once is that I can then take a towel and wipe it down, and I can wipe off as much as I want to where the color only stays in the crevices and comes off of the face of the tooth. And if I want to put another layer on top of that, I certainly can, but I can determine the amount of decay just by how much I wipe off. Okay, good news on the gingivitis front. All of the teeth have been appropriately aged and weathered, and the gums the same deal, and it looks like a lifelong tobacco chewer. But things are working well here. I've got to paint the pupils in on the eyes, so that is the next thing. And then I want to stand them up and see if there are any areas that that I missed while I had him laying on his back, because sometimes you can see things from different angles that you can't always see from the front. So let's do those pupils next. And here is our favorite prawn outside in the bright sun, since we got some sun today, so that you can see his true colors. And the little glossy gleam upon his eye. But I am 98% prepared to say that he is finished. At this point it becomes overworking, so I think he's ready to take his place, his honored place in the collection. I don't know that I would bring him to Wonderfest, only because these guys and the canisters are so delicate that I don't think he would survive the trip. Well, it's Thursday afternoon, and I'm done enough on these eyes, I think, for today. I'm starting to overwork them, so it's time to leave them alone. I like them pretty much where it's going, but what I'm seeing is a little bit too well defined, and to that I mean the whites are too white. The definition of the iris is too clear, that sort of thing. So I'm going to let this dry, put a clear coat over everything, see how I like it then, and then maybe a wash over it. I don't know if it'll be a light red wash or maybe a yellowish wash or something, but something that will knock down the color of the whites of the eyes and kind of blend everything together a little bit. And again, the teeth, very happy with. Really like how that came out. Slimer is darn close to being done. Touch up his fingernails a little bit, and we'll be ready to put him back on his post. Good morning, it's Friday, and this is not the face you want to wake up to first thing in the morning. One last bit on Slimer before I'm ready to stick a fork in him and call him done is his eyes. They are still, I mentioned this before, they're still too sharp and clear. I think what I want to do is make up some sort of milky flesh tone color and put a light wash of that over his eyes so that they don't appear so, I guess bright and intelligent is the word I'm looking for, so that they don't look so contrasty. Maybe that's the word. I'm liking the colors that are there. I just think that there are too they're too well defined. They need to have like a almost like a dead glaze over them of some sort. So I'm thinking that's what I want to do, is just dull them down a little bit. So I'm thinking that I might want to make up not a flat, because then that gets rid of the whole reason I put the gloss on them. I mean, it's not that they're too shiny, it's that they're too bright. So I think I'm going to make some sort of a milky, maybe a sepia over them to dead them down a little bit, and then we'll call it done. I'm going to experiment on a couple different colors to see how well it works. Okay, before Christopher Johnson goes into his final display space, I wanted to get a nice little turnaround of him here. The problem with him being so busy, and not that he's a busy man, he's been waiting around for 4 years to get finished, 3.5, I'm rounding up. But his look is so busy, and I'm trying to find a nice plain background to put him against, because the all the paints on the shelves behind him is so busy that he doesn't stand out very well from it. So giving a nice little turnaround without the distractions of seeing the background. And the things on the base, including that sign. That the chipping experiment wasn't all that well, but hey, you know, you live and you learn. And the cat food cans. But well worth the wait, I think. Although you might, your mileage may vary. But for an example of persistence and patience, I think he pays off. And there you go. And there is Christopher Johnson in his new happy home. Actually, his old happy home. He was always supposed to be in this case. As a matter of fact, he rested here for many years in his unpainted state, because I knew he was going to be in here. But he takes his honored place along with the Martian from War of the Worlds, Narfel the Garthok, Groot and Rocket, and now Christopher Johnson. Welcome home, sir. It's been a long time coming. Okay, I don't know whether you can tell from this video or not, but I took my old friend Comart. They have a color called Dust, and it's got a pink tint to it, which I thought was just right. And I just put a light coat of that on and then wiped it off over the high spots, but it settled down in the corners of the eyes and actually gave a fleshy appearance. Sort of like, yes, Slimer is green, but he's got pink gums. He's green, but he's got pink around his eyes. So I think that's going to work out just fine. I may see whether or not it needs a gloss coat over top of that. I like that it dulled the colors down. A gloss coat might bring that back, or I want them to look wet, hence the gloss coat, but I also don't want them to go back to that hyper contrast state that it was before. So maybe a gloss over this milky color will give me a gloss milk. I know that's a weird combination, but I think it's going to do just the trick. Okay, I'm willing to call Slimer finished, but I've got him back on his base and I'm not happy. I think I need to raise him up about 2 feet. My only concern is that going to make him way too top heavy, and is the whole base going to want to fall over? Now that's a 2-foot base, and it's got tunnel wheels on it. I mean, it moves very smoothly. My question is, I can't, and the base, or the center of gravity is right there. I could angle him up, but then I'd lose all of the depth inside his mouth, because the mouth actually goes all the way back to here, And if I tried running the pole this way, I couldn't do it and have the deep mouth in there. So I'm kind of going off the shoulders being square to the ground and calling that my, my center of gravity that way. If I try twisting them up this way, it's just a bigger hassle that I think is going to be worth it. So in order to get that mouth and eyes up to where you can appreciate it, I think I am either stuck with the idea of suspending him from the ceiling, which would entail a whole nother bag of worms, or raising him up on the post. So let's see how that goes. Okay, well, I added another foot of height to the post that's holding up Slimer. I have to say I like it better because I am seeing his face definitely, and you can get right underneath it and see his eyes and his teeth. And especially if you're a small child, that would be the perfect height for getting your picture taken with him. I am a little bit wary of how fragile this is. He's kind of top heavy. I don't think he's ever going to fall over, but it's definitely not something I would dance around with. Hopefully in situations he would be roped off or otherwise stanchioned so that you couldn't just, run up and tug on him. But he's kind of got a floaty motion going. The eyes I did fog over a little bit so they're not quite as bright. I glued the tongue in finally. That was something you may not have seen. I got that thing stuck in. And I'm ready to call him done. A little bit of touch up on the black pole with some black paint, but other than that, I think he's good. May play around with the base a little bit more to reinforce that. All I'm seeing is that, all that's really holding him down is that one plate with some heavy screws in it. So we might want to do something that is a little bit more spread out and gives him a little bit more oomph to his base. But other than that, he's good to go. So another testament to the power of persistence and patience. Of course, the question now is, how do I get him through the doorway? He'll fit through that one, but some of these other shorter doorways he may not go through. I may have to debase him. Oh, I hate to be debasing, but I might have to debase him to get him through the doorways. Well, to paraphrase Lord Vader, this will be a day long remembered. Yes, it took 3.5, maybe 4 years to finish Christopher Johnson, but finish him we did. And also, I drug my feet way too long on Slimer getting the eyes and teeth done. And really, as soon as I got the gloss on there, it went like that. It was just figuring out the best way to do it, and then, like I told others, getting off my behind and doing it. So that's the week that was. I kind of like this pace. I wasn't busting my hump all week. I kind of took my time and did a little bit each day, and now I've got the whole weekend to clear the decks and think about the next projects. But I feel good. Not only does Christopher Johnson, he's secure in a cabinet where his little antennas and those canister guns on the canisters on the gun, them things will not have any reason to jump ship. So he's done, and I'm not stepping around him ever so much. And Slimer, he's done. I'm not stepping around him either. So let's start up some fresh stuff. I've got, like everybody out there, I've got more kits that are halfway done, that are not finished, that you've never seen. And trust me when I tell you, you don't want to see them. But that was the week that was. Didn't mention to you on last week's episode, but I'll tell you now. I had the great pleasure of being interviewed for the Interstellar Modeler website. Augie over there sent me a nice email, wanted to know if I wanted to share some of my wisdom, so to speak, and modeling experience with his audience, and I was happy to. And that interview is up online now, and I'll probably just put the website address here, so you can go there and see it. If you can't get enough of me in my own videos, you can watch me on his videos, where I can tell you right now, I don't make any more sense there than I did here. Except I do look off camera a lot, because I was watching him on my screen instead of the little camera at the top of the screen. So you get this 10-yard stare, which is not very convincing. So until next week, when we'll have 2 completely new projects to work at. Be good to each other, and we'll see you here next time. Bye now.